play something then, if you can even hear the notes." The words cut through the auditorium like a knife. The frail black janitor stood frozen at the grand piano. What happened next silenced an entire concert hall and changed lives forever. Marcus Johnson had spent 15 years quietly polishing pianos at the prestigious Boston Conservatory of Music. At 67, his weathered dark skin mapped a life of struggle, his sparse white hair and stooped shoulders speaking of battles fought long before he ever picked up a mop. His faded blue uniform hung loosely on his thin frame, patched at the elbows and knees, a stark contrast to the gleaming instruments he tended. No one knew his story. No one asked. To them, he was just the old deaf janitor who nodded politely and read lips when necessary. The students in designer clothes passed him without a glance, their expensive leather cases brushing against his worn work boots. Marcus moved through the halls like a ghost, his callous hands, once strong enough to carry wounded comrades across Vietnamese jungles, now gentle enough to dust the delicate mechanisms of concert pianos without disturbing a single string. His hearing aids, outdated and often turned off to save batteries, hung behind his ears like forgotten medals. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., before the building filled with ambitious young musicians, Marcus would stand alone in the grand hall. He'd feel the floor beneath his feet, place his palm against the side of the Steinway Model D, and close his eyes. Though his ears had been damaged by artillery fire decades ago, his body remembered what music felt like. The vibrations were his symphony, a secret language between his soul and the instrument. Sometimes, when truly alone, he would sit and let his fingers hover above the keys, never pressing down, just remembering the makeshift piano in the military hospital where he once played for dying soldiers, remembering the music that had once flowed through him before the world decided men like him belonged in the shadows. "You missed a spot." Marcus turned slowly, his cleaning cloth still in hand. Standing in the doorway was Dr. Richard Harrison, the conservatory's music director. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. His lips moved with exaggerated slowness, mocking Marcus's disability. Right there, Harrison pointed at the gleaming surface of the grand piano with a manicured finger. "Though I suppose you can't hear how dirty it sounds either." A few students standing nearby snickered. Marcus nodded silently and turned back to polish the already immaculate surface. Years ago, such casual cruelty might have provoked a response. Now, the discipline forged in military service kept his expression neutral, his movements measured. Harrison wasn't finished. "We have the Whitmore competition auditions tomorrow. Make sure you're invisible. These instruments aren't meant for people like you to touch." Marcus felt the vibration of the heavy door closing as Harrison left. He exhaled slowly, the weight of the words settling on shoulders that had carried heavier burdens. Later that afternoon, as Marcus emptied trash bins in practice rooms, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Jordan, a young security guard with kind eyes and a military posture that Marcus recognized immediately. "You were Army?" Marcus asked, noticing Jordan's watch. "Standard issue for recent veterans." "Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan," Jordan replied, his hands moving in basic sign language. "My sister's deaf. I notice your aids." Marcus smiled, his first genuine smile in days. "I saw you earlier," Jordan continued, both speaking and signing. "When everyone left for lunch, you were sitting at the piano." Marcus's smile vanished. "I wasn't playing. Your hands were moving, and the way you positioned your body, that's not a janitor, that's a musician." Marcus shook his head. "That was a long time ago." Jordan leaned against the doorframe. "The Whitmore has a wild card slot. 1 spot for an unknown talent. Auditions tomorrow." Marcus laughed bitterly. A deaf old black janitor in a competition for prodigies? Why not? Jordan asked simply, "What's the worst that could happen?" That evening, Marcus sat alone in his small apartment in Dorchester. The walls thin enough they could feel the bass from his neighbor's television even with his hearing aids off. The room was sparse but meticulously organized, a military habit he'd never lost. A folded American flag sat in a shadow box beside a Purple Heart and Bronze Star. Below them, a faded photograph. A younger Marcus in uniform, sitting at a battered upright piano surrounded by wounded soldiers. On his small kitchen table lay a pamphlet Jordan had pressed into his hand before leaving. The Whitmore Invitational. Discover the next great virtuoso. The wild card audition was listed in bold. Open slot. One unnamed talent will be selected. Audition tomorrow, 9 a.m. Marcus's fingers tapped unconsciously on the table, playing an invisible melody. He hadn't touched a real piano in years, not since the VA hospital where he'd volunteered after discharge. His hearing had deteriorated too much by then. The doctor said a deaf pianist was a contradiction. He opened his drawer and pulled out a small, worn notebook filled with handwritten music. Compositions he created by feeling vibrations, by memory, by the mathematics of music he'd studied before the war. Music that existed only in his mind and hands. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering his commanding officer's words after the explosion that damaged his hearing. A Marine adapts and overcomes, son. No excuses. He'd adapted to a world of muffled sounds and vibrations. He'd overcome the prejudice that came with being both black and disabled in America. But this, stepping onto a stage meant for young prodigies, seemed impossible. Yet something in Jordan's challenge had awakened the Marine in him. The part that never backed down, never surrendered. Marcus carefully pressed his only dress shirt and set his alarm. Some battles were worth fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. The next morning, Marcus arrived at conservatory an hour early, wearing his cleanest work pants and the pressed shirt, faded blue but dignified. He'd polished his old work boots and trimmed his sparse white hair. His hearing aids returned to their highest setting, batteries fresh, though the world still reached him as if through water. The registration table was set up in the main lobby. Young musicians in expensive outfits lined up, carrying leather portfolios and instrument cases, trading stories about prestigious summer programs and famous teachers. Marcus stood at the back, clutching his notebook of compositions, feeling increasingly out of place. When he finally reached the front, the woman behind the table, Meredith Clark, according to her name tag, looked up with visible surprise. "Can I help you?" she asked, her lips moving slowly as people often did when they realized he was deaf. "I'd like to register for the wild card audition," Marcus said, his voice carrying the slightly flattened tone of someone who can't fully hear themselves. Meredith glanced at his janitor's badge, still pinned to his shirt. "This is for musicians," she said loudly, as if volume could bridge the gap of understanding. "I am a musician," Marcus replied steadily. A young man in line behind him laughed. "Hey, old-timer, the maintenance department is downstairs." Marcus didn't turn around. He'd faced worse in Vietnam. Meredith reluctantly handed him a form. "Name?" "Marcus Johnson." "And your piece?" "Original composition." She raised an eyebrow. "The committee generally prefers classical selections." "It's all I have," Marcus said simply, as he turned to find a seat in the waiting area. He felt the stares and heard the whispers, or rather, saw the lips moving, the smirks, the sidelong glances. An hour later, Marcus was the last to be called. As he walked toward the audition room, Dr. Harrison emerged from inside, saw him, and froze. "What is this?" Harrison demanded. "A joke." "I'm here to audition," Marcus said calmly. Harrison's face darkened. "This is a prestigious competition, not a charity event." Before Marcus could respond, Jordan appeared. "Sir, the rules state anyone can audition for the wild card slot." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Fine," he said coldly, "but we don't have time for games." He turned the committee inside. "Give Mr. Johnson the practice piano in the corner. It hasn't been tuned for the competition." Marcus entered the room, feeling the vibrations of whispers following him. The practice piano was an old upright, scratched and worn, pushed against the wall like an afterthought. As Marcus sat down, Harrison smiled thinly. "Play something then, if you can even hear the notes." Marcus placed his hands on the keys, feeling the cool ivory beneath his fingertips. He closed his eyes, shutting out the skeptical faces, the smirks, the pity. In this moment, his deafness wasn't a disability. It was a different way of experiencing music. Through touch, through vibration, through memory. He began softly, a simple melody that rippled outward like stones dropped in still water. His left hand established a rhythm that he could feel through the wooden frame of the old piano, steady, grounding like the heartbeat of the earth. His right hand explored higher registers, creating patterns that flowed from somewhere deep within him. The piano was indeed out of tune, its hammers worn, its soundboard cracked with age. But Marcus knew broken things. He'd been one himself. He understood how to coax beauty from imperfection. As he played, his body swayed slightly, feeling the vibrations travel up his arms and into his chest. Though he couldn't hear the music as others did, he could feel it. In the resonance of the strings, in the way the piano's frame hummed beneath his touch, in the mathematics of harmony that had been etched into his soul long before artillery fire had stolen his hearing. In the back of the room, a judge leaned forward, pen frozen above her notepad. Another removed his glasses, blinking in disbelief. Even Harrison's smug expression began to falter as the music filled the space. Marcus's composition told a story without words, of jungle nights filled with fear, of comrades lost, of finding small moments of beauty amid chaos. The melody grew more complex, his gnarled fingers moving with surprising agility across the keys. What began as a simple tune evolved into something rich with jazz influences, classical structure, and the soulful depth of gospel. A young violinist in the back row closed her eyes, swaying slightly. An elderly judge wiped away a tear. The music spoke of resilience, of survival, of finding voice after years of silence. When Marcus reached a crescendo, a passage that required both technical precision and emotional vulnerability, his entire body became an instrument of expression. His face, usually guarded, open like a flower to the sun, revealing the soul of the artist he had always been beneath the janitor's uniform. The final notes lingered in the air, vibrating to the floorboards, up through Marcus's feet, into his body, a communion between artist and art that transcended ordinary hearing. For several seconds, the room remained perfectly still. Then one of the judges stood, applauding vigorously. Others followed, rising to their feet, their faces transformed by what they had witnessed. Dr. Harrison remained seated, his expression unreadable, his worldview visibly shaken. "Mr. Johnson," the female judge said, approaching him with wonder in her eyes, "that was extraordinary. How did you, with your condition?" Marcus smiled gently. "Music isn't just what you hear," he said, placing his hand over his heart. "It's what you feel." "Where did you study?" another judge asked. "I taught myself mostly," Marcus replied. "Started as a boy in church. Then in the military, I played for the wounded. Music was healing for them. For me too." "The military?" Harrison interrupted, finally finding his voice. Marcus nodded. "Marine Corps, 20 years. Until this happened." He gestured toward his hearing aids. "Artillery fire in Vietnam." The revelation hung in the air, adding another layer to the room's shifting perception of the old janitor. The following day, Marcus arrived at work as usual, mop in hand, ready to clean the practice rooms before students arrived. He was surprised to find Jordan waiting by the main entrance, grinning broadly. "You made it," Jordan signed excitedly. "The wild card spot. They've been looking everywhere for you." Marcus shook his head in disbelief as Jordan led him to the administration office. Inside, the committee members from yesterday's audition waited, along with Dr. Harrison, whose expression was now subdued, almost contrite. "Mr. Johnson," the head judge began, "your performance yesterday was unlike anything we've heard in years. We would be honored to have you as our wild card finalist." As Marcus struggled to process this news, a woman stepped forward, Dr. Elizabeth Chun, the conservatory's historian. She held a book open to a specific page. "I knew I recognized you," she said, her fingers moving in basic sign language as she spoke. "You're Sergeant Marcus Johnson. You performed for the USO in Vietnam before your injury." She turned the book to show a yellowed photograph. A younger Marcus in marine dress blues, seated at a piano on a makeshift stage, surrounded by soldiers. "You were famous among the troops," she continued. "They called you the Marine Maestro. After you lost your hearing, you still played in VA hospitals, developing techniques to feel the music instead of hearing it. The room fell silent as everyone looked at Marcus with new eyes. No longer just an old janitor, but a decorated veteran. A musical innovator. A man who had served both his country and his art with distinction. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. "Mr. Johnson, I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable." Marcus regarded him steadily. "I've been invisible in these halls for 15 years, Dr. Harrison. Not because I'm deaf or black or old, but because you chose not to see me." Harrison nodded, properly chastened. The head judge cleared her throat. "We've contacted the Boston Symphony Orchestra. They're interested in featuring your story and your music. And the conservatory would like to offer you a position, not cleaning our pianos, but teaching our students." Marcus looked around the room, at the people who had walked past him for years, at the administrators who had never bothered to learn his name, at the young musicians now looking at him with oh rather than dismissal. "I didn't compose music for recognition," he said finally. "I did it because even when I couldn't hear the notes anymore, I could still feel them. Music was my way of still belonging to a world that had decided I didn't." The night of the Whitmore Finals arrived. The concert hall buzzed with anticipation, the audience larger than usual. Word had spread about the remarkable wild card finalist. Backstage, Marcus sat quietly, wearing a simple black suit borrowed from Jordan's father. It was slightly too large, but dignified. He declined makeup, refused to cover his hearing aids, and kept his worn but polished work boots. "I want them to see me as I am," he had insisted. The other finalists, young, polished conservatory students, regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. The smug young man who had mocked him at registration now stood awkwardly nearby, unable to meet his eyes. When Marcus's name was called, he walked onto the stage with military precision despite his age and slight limp, a remnant of shrapnel wounds from the same explosion that damaged his hearing. The audience fell silent as they took in sight of this elderly black man approaching the gleaming Steinway grand piano. Before sitting, Marcus removed a small object from his pocket, a faded Marine Corps medallion, and placed it on the piano. A ritual, a connection to the part of his life that had both given and taken so much. He began to play without introduction, without sheet music. His composition started softly, building gradually like a dawn breaking over a battlefield. The music told his story more eloquently than words ever could. The young boy finding solace in church hymns, the Marine playing for wounded comrades, the silence that descended after the explosion, and finally, the rediscovery of music through feeling rather than hearing. The audience was transfixed. In the front row, several veterans, invited specially by Jordan, watched with glistening eyes, recognizing in the music the unspoken language of those who had served. When the final note faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the hall erupted in a standing ovation that Marcus couldn't hear, but could feel through the vibrations in the floor. The judges stood as one, their decision unanimous. Dr. Harrison approached the microphone. "The winner of this year's Whitmore Invitational," he announced, his voice thick with emotion, "is Marcus Johnson." As Marcus accepted the crystal trophy, his expression remained humble. He had won something far more valuable than a competition. He had reclaimed his voice. 6 months later, the Boston Conservatory of Music inaugurated the Marcus Johnson Center for Inclusive Musical Arts, a program specifically designed for musicians with disabilities and those from underrepresented backgrounds. Marcus, now dressed in simple but dignified clothing rather than a janitor's uniform, worked 3 days a week teaching students his unique methods of feeling music beyond hearing it. His story had been featured in national media, inspiring veterans and musicians alike. Dr. Harrison had become an unexpected ally, humbled by his misjudgment and committed to changing the culture of the institution. On the wall of the main hall hung a new photograph. Marcus in his Marine dress blues beside his modern-day self, bridging decades of silence with music. "Music finds a way," Marcus often told his students. "Through war, through silence, through prejudice. It always finds a way." If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage and second chances. Comment below with respect to honor veterans like Marcus, who continue to serve through their gifts and talents.